My family moved to Big Rapids. My father was a professor at Ferris when I was in elementary school, and that's when the Michigan State Spartans were big time. This is 65, 66 teams. So I was immediately a fan, and I have always remained a fan. I only applied to one college, Michigan State, got accepted, and have always had this seed in the back of my mind that there was something unusual about that team. I knew Jimmy Raye was a black quarterback, but I wasn't old enough to understand why that was so unusual. And I've always loved history, and as time went on, I wanted to learn more about it because I figured there had to be more to it than no coach goes 7 for 7 in recruiting. The 7 black stars from the South on Michigan State's 65 and 66 teams. I thought there had to be more to the story. And then when I was writing for Chargers.com, I was fortunate to meet Jimmy's son, who is a vice president of the Chargers and the number 2 man in charge of player personnel. And to me, it was an honor to meet his son. I didn't know if I'd ever meet Jimmy. And as time went on, I relocated to Raleigh-Durham, and that's only an hour away from where Jimmy has his home in Pinehurst. Jimmy always has a free football camp in Fayetteville. This past year was the 12th year. So I asked his son if he would introduce me to Jimmy, and I wanted to tell him that I wanted to write this sports book, but not just a simple sports story about the Spartans. We're a good team. That there was something dynamic going on socially with this team. And they probably haven't received their proper credit. The real story has not been told. Well, not only Jimmy felt the same way, but when he started giving me phone numbers to his teammates, they all felt the same way. They were all very cooperative because they want this story told. So there's 3 basic things that I hope come out of this book that you'll read, and maybe it'll catch on nationally. Maybe a documentary will be made because people do not understand the true story of the Underground Railroad with Duffy Daugherty. And the first point I want to make is that Bubba Smith is the most famous Underground Railroad passenger, and he always will be, because his personality was bigger than he was. But the most socially significant player on the Underground Railroad is Jimmy Raye. And the reason is because he was a black quarterback, and he inspired so many kids who had never seen a black man play quarterback. Jesse Jackson told me that. This is quoted in the book, that Jesse said it was important that Jimmy and Bubba and Gene Washington and the other guys, they didn't have to be out protesting. Just being seen on TV in a positive way was important to the civil rights movement. So, Jimmy, what also makes Jimmy significant is he went on into coaching, thanks to Duffy Daugherty. Duffy brought him into coaching. Jimmy was planning to go to law school. And he coached 6 years of college, 35 years in the NFL. And just about any black coach, and I shouldn't say just any black coach, lots of other coaches too, considers Jimmy a mentor. And I'm speaking from Tony Dungy on down. In the NFL circles, Tony is the most famous because he won a Super Bowl and he's on TV. But in the NFL circles, Jimmy is just as well known and respected as Tony Dungy. And the respect Tony has for Jimmy is evident by his willingness to write the foreword. He did a wonderful job on the foreword. So Jimmy has had a huge impact on a lot of black coaches and athletes. Second, Duffy Daugherty hasn't really gotten his true credit because he was doing in the 60s when things were still volatile, bringing players up from the South in the civil rights movement. People were still being killed. And other coaches, Bear Bryant, if you were, for instance, gets too much credit. Bear Bryant dragged his feet until the 70s when integration was fait accompli. And Duffy put up with a lot of crap, is the way Father Folio put it to me. And Jimmy, he showed Jimmy's a lot of the hate mail that he got. If you saw the movie Jackie Robinson, 42, the scene in there where Branch Rickey shows one of the players all the hate mail he got. Well, it was the same with Duffy Daugherty. So even though we were in the North, not in the South. And so I hope Duffy Daugherty gets his true credit because he did things because he never waited until the time was right, which is what a lot of other coaches said when they explained why they were dragging their feet on recruiting. They said they were waiting for the alumni. Martin Luther King said when he spoke here in 1965 at Michigan State, he said, time is neutral. And it's all, the time to do right is always right. And that was Duffy Daugherty. He did not wait for the alumni to say, okay, it's okay to recruit black players. It's okay to have a black quarterback. And then let me add one more thing. The other thing that made the Underground Railroad work was President John Hanna was also a big advocate of integration. So you had these two men come together at the same time, and I should mention Biggie Munn too. And it's not like President Hanna would have said to Duffy, okay, you can bring up 2 or 3 black players, but no more. No, Duffy had free rein to do what he wanted. And Duffy had a network in the South because he had befriended all these black coaches in the South with the clinics he put on. Bear Bryant and other coaches were not doing clinics for black high school coaches. Duffy, the first time he went down to Atlanta to do a clinic, he was offended that none of the black high school coaches were allowed to attend. And so he subsequently would put on a clinic, like he was obligated to do, and then would put on a second clinic on his own, just for the black high school coaches. Well, they came to trust Duffy, and they said, after a few years, and they said, well, hey, Duffy, I got this player I want to send you. And it turned out to be Bubba Smith, George Webster, and Jimmy Raye. So that was where the Underground Railroad came from, and that's what people don't understand. They think that Duffy just recruited a handful of All-Americans to win games. It's not true. The Underground Railroad happened by accident because he befriended so many of the black coaches in the South, and they trusted him. And then the third thing that I hope comes out of the book is the Underground Railroad was also a story of education and opportunity. So we know about Bubba and George Wester and Jimmy, and Gene Washington is also in the Hall of Fame. But there's guys like Clifton Rofe, who was hurt and never played it down. He's from Arkansas. Ernie Pastore, who still lives in the area, got hurt later in his career and was never a star. And these guys came up here as high school stars. But Duffy kept them on scholarship, and they remained grateful to Michigan State that they graduated and then went on and had successful careers. Clifton Rofe just retired recently as a dentist after 40 years. Ernie was a principal at Grand Rapids Union, and then he ran a juvenile facility near Ann Arbor. And so they felt, just like Jimmy also, they felt it was important to not just come up here and play football, but they wanted to show their teachers at the segregated high schools they attended that although they had limited resources, they did the best they could to educate them. And Jimmy and Ernie and Clifton Rofe and the others fulfilled their responsibility by graduating. And then, so that's why I say it's also a story of education and opportunity. So these are some of the myths that I hope people come to understand about the Underground Railroad. And there's one more point I want to make, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy. Talking about how important it was to have role models to these first few black players to help clear a path for others, which is what Jimmy has done. He cleared the path in coaching as an assistant coach and an offensive coordinator. He didn't get to be a head coach, but he cleared it for the other coaches who have. So, but Jimmy tells a story about he was a 3-year starter at E.E. Smith in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and he was a sophomore, and he's watching the Rose Bowl. Minnesota's playing in the Rose Bowl, and Minnesota had a black quarterback named Sandy Stevens. But Jimmy had no idea he was black until he saw him on TV. And that was the first time he thought that he could play in the Big Ten too. So then Jimmy comes up to Michigan State as a scared freshman like all of us were when we went off to college in 1964. And he sees this portrait in Jenison Fieldhouse of Gideon Smith, Michigan State black athlete in 1913 to 1915. Great story on him. Michigan State beat Michigan for the first time because of Gideon Smith. He was such a tremendous player. And Jimmy realized, well, if he can do it in 1913, I can do it in 1964. So then Jimmy's playing quarterback at Spartan Stadium, and there's this young kid, maybe 12 years old, named Tony Dungy going to ball games. And he sees this black quarterback, and he's so surprised. So Tony tells the story that when he was a kid and they played football in the backyard, he wasn't Bart Starr or Johnny Unitas. He was Jimmy Raye. So as you can see, just on and on and on, somebody cleared the path for the next guy. And that's what I hope people come to understand was a true success story of the Underground Railroad. It was not just about winning a couple of national titles. And now that's enough for me. It's my pleasure to hear one of the all-time Michigan State legends who belongs in the Michigan State Hall of Fame. Why he's not in there now, I don't understand. But let me introduce Jimmy Raye.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here. I don't get back here very often. Over the last 35 years or so, I've been involved in, as Tom mentioned, in a career as a professional football coach, which served me well, and all because of the things that came together here in East Lansing. Riding up here today, as I got directions, I went by the train station over there on Michigan Avenue, and it's kind of hard to imagine that almost 50 years ago, my mom and dad put me on a train in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and 36 hours later, I ended up at that train station over on Michigan Avenue, called Vince Carolot, and he came and got me, took me out to Michigan State to the campus. But as I reflect and think back on it, and doing the book with Tom, he asked, I have a foundation in North Carolina, in Fayetteville, and Cumberland, and Moore County, the Jimmy Raye Youth Foundation. We award annually scholarships for youngsters that are trying to continue their education and have a better chance at a better life. And along with that, a football camp to teach life skills to youngsters and bring in former pro athletes or pro athletes that I've had the privilege of working with to mentor some of these youngsters and try to give them the whole scenario. Coming to Michigan State when I did, there are a couple of ironies to my getting here. The South was segregated when I was a senior in high school. My first recollection of Michigan State, I was a junior at E.E. Smith High School in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And in November, Michigan State, a great All-American running back named Sherman Lewis, was getting ready to play the University of Illinois for the Big Ten championship, and President Kennedy got killed. And they canceled the game, did not play the game when it was supposed to be played. That was my first knowledge of Michigan State, because they canceled the game and they played it later, and fortunately Dick Buckers and his crew prevailed and they won and went to the Rose Bowl. But that following year, I was selected to play in the East-West Shrine game in North Carolina, which pitted the best high school football players from the East against the best high school football players in the West. And fortunately for me, unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I was voted the most valuable player in that game. And at that game was Cal Stoll, an assistant coach at Michigan State University. And he presented me the award for being the most valuable player in the game. And then I started to receive literature from Michigan State about recruiting. I always kind of thought, and one of the interviewers asked me today what possessed me to come, and was I a word afraid of failure? But I never at that time, fear and failure was not an option. First of all, I felt I could compete academically and get an education. The rule of thumb where I grew up in the South was to better yourself. And my mom used to always say, they can't take your education away from you. Was my motive for coming was to get an education. A sidebar to that was playing football, because I had no aspirations at that time of becoming a professional football player is because black quarterbacks didn't play professional football. Sandy Stevens made an indelible impression on me. I've told this story many a times, and yesterday when I think about it, during the time that I was starting my football career at E. Smith, the Rose Bowl game was being played, and at that time, it wasn't the social media as it is today and the TV cameras and that, but when they introduced the players walked up in front of the camera, they stated their name, the town that they were from, and then the next guy stepped up. And as vividly as I see you sitting there today, I never will forget, they got to the next guy in line, and he stepped up and he said, Sandy Stevens, quarterback, Uniontown, Pennsylvania. And he was a black guy. And I was, at that point, I had hope that I could play football at a major university and succeed and get an education. Well, I was recruited by the University of Minnesota. As a matter of fact, that's where I was probably going to go to school because I knew that Sandy had been successful there. Plus, prior to Sandy, there were two guys from my home state, Carl Eller and Bobby Bell, that played at the University of Minnesota that went on to become Hall of Fame players and great Hall of Fame pro football players and All-American football players at the University of Minnesota. So as I matriculated here to East Lansing, I came to visit the school, and my host and his brother is here tonight, a very dear friend of mine, was Charlie Mad Dog Thornhill, and he was from Roanoke, Virginia. Then they gave him, the weekend that I was here, they gave him me to show around campus. I was interested when I got here because I wanted to meet Jim Garrett. I had known of Jimmy Garrett because back then in the South, in segregation, the best black players in North Carolina and the best black players in South Carolina, you were aware of who was who. And if you were in that elite category, you knew of each other. And I knew of Jimmy Garrett, and he was from Columbia, South Carolina. So my motive when I got here was to find Jimmy Garrett, because he was the best high school quarterback that the state of South Carolina at that time had ever produced. So I said, well, I'm going to find Jimmy Garrett and find out if this Big Ten thing is really what it's marked up to be. And I met Jim Garrett, and coincidentally, the same time that I was on the visit, I met another black quarterback here named Eric Marshall. And all of the guys that I met, Bubba, George, Jimmy Summers, Jimmy Hoy, Harold Lucas, it was a great bunch of individual guys here, Clinton Jones, Gene Washington. Most of their advice to me was, don't come here if you want to be a quarterback. They're going to change your position. You won't play quarterback. Well, kind of a prelude to that was there was a head coach at North Carolina State University that had been a former assistant at Michigan State University under Biggie Munn on staff with Duffy Daugherty. And his name was Earl Edwards. And Earl, to my family, was giving advice about Michigan State and what a great place it was, and that I should highly consider being a part of the Spartan family, even though he couldn't recruit me to North Carolina State because of the Jim Crow laws. He was really talking about the people in athletic administration and character of Michigan State, mainly Duffy and Biggie, and thought it would be a great place for me to go. So my mom wanted to know from Duffy first of all, if the scholarship was for 4 years. Did I have a scholarship for 4 years, and would I get an education? And the answer to those questions were yes. And then she wanted to know, will my boy be a quarterback? And his response to that was, he'll be a quarterback as long as he wants to be a quarterback. Now, at 18 years old, that was all I wanted to hear, but little did I know that that was a loaded response. I mean, that was that was a college coach recruiting, saying the right thing. And I took that and heeded what he said and trusted that that was true based on our relationship with Earl Edwards and the people that I had met at Michigan State. And they said that I would be changed if I came here. And the most important thing I think that happened for me at the time was when I came out of high school, freshmen wasn't eligible to play football. You had to play freshman ball for a year, and then your sophomore, junior, senior year, you played varsity. So I had an opportunity as a freshman to not have to worry about the competition of playing in games, but learning how to play. And I was mentored by a dear friend, Dick Purlestow. He's since passed away, a former varsity quarterback that had injured himself, and he was assigned to teach me all the rudiments of the offense. And a dear friend, his brother and I played together. He's here this weekend, Jim Purlestow. Going okay. I was fortunate enough to be named the most valuable freshman football player in 1964. And as I matured, and most of my maturity took place here in my young adult life at Michigan State, met some dear friends from Detroit, 2 of whom are here tonight. A lot of guys that were from Detroit and from the Saginaw Valley and from Flint. My first roommate, unfortunately, was from Lansing Sexton High School, Bill, and he quit school. He started out, he was a great fullback over at Lansing Sexton High School, and he was my roommate, and Bill quit somewhere in the middle of the season. Well, that was kind of a prelude to what happened after that, because my next roommate I changed was Dwight Lee, and he was from New Haven, Michigan. And that was a good thing, except every weekend he was in love. He'd take off and go home. So I was left by myself to fend for myself. But as I look back on it and over the years, there was no way to, at the time that I was going through it, to understand the significance of what was taking place. But I do remember I came out of freshman football as the most valuable player on the freshman team, went into spring football. In the first 3 practices of spring football, I didn't get a snap. And so now the doubt started to creep in, and I said, well, all the things that I heard when I was being recruited, that they were going to switch me, probably is going to happen. And one day we were walking from the fields up on the upper level from where Case Hall is, back to the stadium, and I had my head down and I was moping and feeling sorry for myself. And an arm came around my shoulder, and he said to me, you're gonna get your chance. And that was Vince Carolot. He was the defensive back coach. He said, you're gonna get your chance. And as time wore on, a couple of guys got injured, and they put me in the 3rd week of the spring practices, and they put me in against George, Bubba, Don Billwitz, Ron Buford. They put me in against, which turned out to be arguably one of the greatest college defenses of all time, the 1965 team that held Notre Dame, Michigan, and Ohio State to minus total yardage offensively. That was my welcome to the varsity. And I think what happened during that time, I was labeled, when I came out of high school in North Carolina, I was one of the best passing quarterbacks in the state. And in that scrimmage, the last thing I was thinking about was throwing a pass. I was running for my life. And I think I got mislabeled as a runner, which turned out to be fine because it allowed me to be able to play. But I was Clifton Rolfe, who Tom alluded to you earlier. His son, Willie Rolfe, is in the Hall of Fame. Was an offensive tackle for the New Orleans Saints and the Kansas City Chiefs for 15 years. He played here, got hurt his first year, his knee, and never played. He went on to dental school and was a practicing dentist in Pine Bluff, Arkansas for 40-some years. And we were together at a function in Raleigh back in the spring. And I don't know that I could make you really understand the significance of the time and what took place and how it all came together. But I remember very, very vividly, we were, as sophomores, going to be sophomores, the varsity, we were staying in Case Hall, and the varsity players made the young guys sing your fight song or a modern song or whatever. You had to get up and sing. And one of the guys and this was one of the galvanizing forces of that 65 season, one of the guys that later became my roommate, he was from Dayton, Ohio, and everybody was trying to do their Temptation sing, their Smokey Robinson deal, or whatever. And he sang a song by the Beach Boys. I wish they could all be California girls. And this is a black guy. And I think with that, it broke down the cafeteria and the barriers that black guys sat with the black guys and the white guys sat with the white guys. And pretty soon it was cool to sit wherever you wanted to sit. And he went on that year to win the All Can Award. He's a very dear friend of mine. He went on that year to win the All Can Award. And the impetus of that changed the dynamics of us all being individuals as players and became a team. And Duffy used to say to us in the meetings, in the team meetings, he said, if you will play with enthusiasm and do the things that you're supposed to do with a team, your names will be written in indelible ink, and it will last a lifetime. Now, I don't know about any of the other guys in the room, but I didn't have any idea what indelible meant. But I came to realize and understand what he said came true. I ended up working my way in a position of being the backup quarterback to the 1965 team, the won 10-0 prior to going to the Rose Bowl, and to Steve Juday. And the reporter asked me the other night, what was the most difficult part of doing the book? And I thought back on it and thought about it. And really the most difficult part of doing that book was having to relive the Rose Bowl, where we were upset. We were undefeated, #1 team in the country, and we were upset in the Rose Bowl by UCLA 14-12. And I was with my longtime friend, Bob Apisa, today. That game, the reason it was difficult was because of all of the memories that came flooding back, and all of the anxiety and the apprehension and all of the things that happened to people, players, in that game that really kind of changed that season. And to have to relive those thoughts and not playing in the game until the latter part of the game, and us almost winning, and Duffy and I on the sideline, if the score was 14-12, we made a decision to go for the 2-point conversion. What prompted that was after the first time we scored, we went for 2 and didn't get it. Which, had we kicked after the first, this is coach talking now, but had we kicked after the first score and made it 14-7, because back then they didn't play, the game could end in a tie. They didn't play off to a team won. So we were down 14-6, we score again. Late in the game, it goes 14-12. And he brings me to the boundary and he says, tell the official to put the ball on the left hash mark so that the wide side of the field is to the right from where we were standing. So I said, okay. And I started to go back on the field, and he pulled me back. He said, pitch the ball to Bob. And I started to leave again. He pulled me back and he said, did you understand what I said? Pitch the ball to Bob. And Bob was Bob Apisa, Hawaiian fullback, about 240 pounds. And I said, yeah, I understand. So we went back out and we ran the play. It was called sprint option at 9. And I pitched the ball to Bob, which I was instructed to do. But when we moved the ball to the left hash, UCLA and Terry Donahue and all that group, they all knew what we were going to do. But Bob at 240, there wasn't any way they could stop him for 2 yards. But he had, prior to that game, missed the final game because of a knee injury. But he cut better going to his right, so that's why we were in that position. So I flipped it to Bob. And then Styles.
This is Bob Styles.
Bob Styles made the hit of his life and stopped Bob a half yard short and was voted most valuable player in the Rose Bowl game for that play. Myself out on the play, stopping Bob. But the irony of it is, as a coach, and I learned this as a coach, is let the players play. Because I could have run all the way back to Fayetteville, North Carolina on that play, because they all flew outside to Bob. If I'd have just faked the pitch to Bob and turned, I could have run all the way back to Fayetteville. But the instructions were to pitch the ball to Bob, and I did, and we fell short, and we ended up 10-1. But I think prior to that game, they voted the national champions prior to the bowl games back in that day, and so we were still national champs. I say in the book, and I really believe this, is that as difficult as it was and as courageous as Duffy was with the things that he did, but had I not played in the Rose Bowl game, I don't think I would have ever started at quarterback for Michigan State. I went into that game with a pretty good resume as a sophomore quarterback. And he said to me during the game, as the game was nearing the end, he called me on the boundary 2 or 3 times and said, warm up and get ready to go in, which had happened most of the time during the year. but he never put me in. So we go in at halftime, and he told the team, we're gonna make a change, and Jimmy Raye's gonna start the second half. So we're coming out of this tunnel at the Rose Bowl. It's a long, deep, dark place, and we get to the tunnel, and I'm in the back because the quarterbacks came out last, and he pulled me back and he said, I'm going to give Steve one more series to see if he can get going in the second half. And he said, I know you don't understand it, and I don't expect you to, but when you get to be a senior, you will. And it took me a while to come to grips with that, but I understood the loyalty and what he was doing. I didn't at that time, but as time wore on, I understood what he was doing, repaying Steve for he was a co-captain and an All-American, and it was his team and his time to shine. Just unfortunate for us, is that he didn't have one of his better days. And that was what I was alluding to when I said earlier that doing the book, having to relive that was probably, because I know all the people that were involved. We made a bunch of changes that we didn't do before, and it was all for the good of the seniors and the leadership that they had shown. But at 18, 19 years old, it was hard to fathom. But as life moved on, and I go into the spring of my junior year, 1966, and we got all the big five coming back. We got Bub, we got Mickey, we got Clinton Jones, and Gene Washington, and Bob Lapisa, and George Chatlis, and Jimmy Summers, and Sterling Armstrong, and Drake Garrett, and Jess Phillips, and we still got a pretty good deck. And very ironically, my first start as a quarterback at Michigan State was against North Carolina State and Coach Earl Edwards in Spartan Stadium. The guy that was responsible for my being there, my opening start was against him. We beat them 28-10. I was awarded the game ball, which I still have in my den in North Carolina. And you know, they say what goes around comes around, and the more things change, the more they stay the same. He made a statement after that game, and it probably News and Observer, that it was time for the Atlantic Coast Conference and for the North Carolina schools to start keeping some of their best talent at home. The progress that was made, it was during the Civil Rights era, the Voting Rights Act in 64 and 65. We were insulated because we were playing football. I don't know how many times over the years I've been places and people can remember exactly where they were, whether it was Vietnam or Korea or off with their parents, and somebody comes up to me and says, I remember exactly where I was when Michigan State played Notre Dame in the 10-10 tie game. And as I think back on it, winning is why you do it. You play to win, and Duffy used to say a tie is like kissing your sister. But with all that transpired, going to classes and playing it's really funny that the game that you're most remembered for is a game you didn't win, a game that you tied. And fortunately for us, as history has prevailed, it has lived on in that indelible ink that he talked about. It has lived on here near 50 years later. People still refer to the game of the century, and they are amazed. I'm a member of Forest Creek Golf Club down in Pinehurst, North Carolina, and these guys are curious as to who I am, and then they go Google me and come back and say, You were the quarterback at Michigan State in 1960. They can't fathom that I could have possibly been a quarterback in 1960, 64 at Michigan State, or 66 at Michigan State. But Michigan State served me well. I'm very proud of the opportunity that it gave me. Football was only a part of it. The real objective was an education, which I got. I tell you, an interesting irony is when I visited Michigan State, I came in the spring of the year, and it was beautiful. The Red Cedar River was flowing, and Mad Dog took me over to the IM building, and the girls were in summer school, were laying out on the deal tanning, and I came back to school in the fall, and in early part of November it snowed. My life. And so I didn't go to class. Because in North Carolina, when it snowed, you didn't go. They canceled school, you didn't go. So I'm laying in the bed the second day, and Hank Bullock comes pounding on the door, and says, "What, Jimmy Raye, what are you doing? Why aren't you in class?" I said, "It's snowing." and he said, "Well, if you're not going to go to school when it snows, you might as well go back to North Carolina now, because it's going to be like this until May." So it's interesting, I don't like the snow. My wife is here in the audience tonight, sitting back on the left, my lovely wife for 40 plus years at Jimmy Raye. And I tell that snow story to lead into this, and I'll take questions after this. I had, as a freshman, I had a class with a young lady from Detroit named Vita Dove, and we were coming from class, and I didn't like the cold and the snow, and she takes this snowball and hits me back of the head down the back of my shirt, and I almost had a fit. I couldn't stand the snow. I couldn't stand it. She knew I didn't like the snow, but we've been lifelong friends and dear friends ever since, and she's here tonight also. But it was an interesting experience, a great experience. The mentorship of the guys that were here, the older guys, my fraternity brothers, Omegas, the things that helped me acclimate to Michigan State, be able to deal with the scrutiny, playing a very unique position. I was the only black quarterback starting at a major university in the country in 1966. And now you look, and it's almost, you're almost surprised if a college doesn't have a black quarterback now. And hopefully in some small way, the things that Sandy Stevens inspired me to do, and the things that I was able to inspire the Charlie Baggett's and the Tyrone Willinghams and the Tony Dungy's of the world to be able to do going forward, that some of that was in good deed and in good stead. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take questions. I just want to add one little thing to what Jimmy was saying, talking about how it's hard to explain how important it was for them to graduate and to succeed and take advantage of their opportunity. Clifton Rove never played it down for Michigan State, and he's quoted in the book, because of his injury, saying, "I'm indebted to the people of Michigan State for the successful career he had as a dentist." And then when Jimmy and I spoke at the Raleigh Sports Council luncheon, I hadn't seen this elsewhere, but in the South I think it was a little bit different. The older black gentlemen were just in awe of Jimmy. You could see the reverence, because Jimmy had done what they couldn't even dream about. Jimmy could dream about it because change was coming. But earlier generations, or 10 years older, they couldn't even think about it. And they just had reverence. You could just see it in their eyes for Jimmy. Questions?
I don't have a question. I'm a former alumni, happy in Michigan State, but I just wanted the audience to know this. One of the individuals that Jimmy made mention of, Jim Garrett, his wife Linda is here.
Yeah, Linda was real helpful with the book. Jim's football career was a disappointment, but he, on his track and field career alone, belongs in the Michigan State Hall of Fame. Michigan State won back-to-back indoor Big Ten titles, and then an outdoor title in '66. And Michigan State's never come close to doing anything like that in team titles. And Jim Garrett scored most of those points on those teams. He was an 8-time Big Ten medalist and 2 or 3 NCAA medalist, 2 or 3-time NCAA medalist. So that's another guy from that era who belongs in Michigan State's Hall of Fame. Yeah. Question?
Jimmy, brother Jimmy, I want to tell you that there's a lot of emphasis on sports at Michigan State and all that, but for those of us who didn't play sports, you were an inspiration. You, people like Stan Washington, folks that I had only heard about prior to coming to Michigan State. I'm from Detroit. I never knew that eventually you all would be my fraternity brothers and all of that. My impression of Michigan State, my first 2 or 3 days, I was out of Troy Hickman's house. So you know the education I began to get. But that being said, for those of us who, if you were black, if you wanted to go to Michigan State, you had to either be real smart or play sports. I was neither. So I can tell you that for those of us who didn't play sports but were around during that period of time, it was quite an inspiration. If you attended the 10-10 tie, the silence at the end of that game was something that I'll never forget. I know Rick will never forget it, because he was on the team. But just if you were in the audience, it was the strangest feeling. That being said, for those of us who did not play sports, but who needed an inspiration, I thought about people like Carol Lucas, Earl Latimer, Herm Johnson, who seemed to me to look like the biggest man I ever saw. But the reality was that for us, you did a good thing. Sports too, but it inspired us.
Thank you. Is this Stan Washington, the basketball player?
Yes.
This man deserves applause. Matthew H. was on those teams. Did you guys share the Big Ten title?
No, that was the year after.
Okay.
Matthew and Lee Lafayette.
Yeah, Lee Lafayette, yeah. Those were great teams. Biggie Munn had it wasn't just football. Biggie Munn had across the landscape, the sports at Michigan State were strong. The soccer teams. Can you imagine having a #1 ranked soccer team in Michigan in the 60s? It happened. Questions?
I was in the stands at the 10-10 time, of course, but my question is the question is, after the loss 14-12, trying to explain that, one of the rumors was that Steve Jude and the team out in California got drunk up and was out mountain climbing the night before. To what extent, if any, was that true? to explain the loss.
They asked me to repeat the questions. The question is the rumor has always been the players were out partying too much before the Rose Bowl.
Well, there's some truth to some of that. Early on, we were excited we were undefeated and riding pretty high. We were excited to go to Los Angeles in the Rose Bowl. One of the players on the UCLA team, a running back by the name of Mel Farr, was from Hebert High School in Beaumont, Texas, which was the rival high school to Charles Pollard that Bubba went to. So Bub had everything set up to mail when we hit town. We'll go Sunset Strip. But about day 3, I think it was, Duffy noticed we wasn't as sharp as we were, so he took us to a monastery. Moved us up to a monastery in the San Gabriel Mountains for the final 2 or 3 days of preparation. And we didn't play our best game. I won't lay it on the fact that we did enjoy LA, but that came to a pretty screeching halt. We didn't play our best game. We fumbled the ball on the 4-yard line to start the game. They came in with a surprise onside kick that we had been told about, and they got the ball. There were some things that happened in the game that we wasn't on top of it. And you have to remember also, in the bowl game, and the attitude toward bowl games at that time, we had already been crowned. And there had been a layoff from the last game that we played until the 3 weeks or the month preceding that we went to Pasadena. So we wasn't as sharp as we were. And then, as I mentioned before, with bringing back the memories of it, we didn't play our best game, and UCLA beat us.
Yeah, I go into detail about the Rose Bowl, almost play-by-play, especially in the second half. So it is true, Jimmy admits they were out partying, but it really wasn't the reason they lost. Like you said, there was a fumble was at the 2-yard line, receiving a punt. A guy who hadn't been doing it all year, but he was a senior, and Duffy put him in there, and he fumbles. UCLA scores, the onside kick, UCLA scores. At that point in the game, UCLA's winning 14-0. And they had like 40 yards of offense and 4 punts and a fumble. So the defense was not getting beat. And in fact, when they made their comeback, Bob Pisa scored on the pitch from Jimmy. They forced a punt. They're running out of time. We're down to like a minute or so. And Bubba Smith partially blocked the punt. And that put the ball at midfield and gave him time to get back down in position for a touchdown. So the defense did its job. They just had the worst fumbles and turnovers at the worst times, and UCLA took advantage of it. But the yardage disparity between Michigan State and UCLA, you'd never know. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple of points I wanted to mention, Jimmy, some of the things that you had done at school there, but even prior, because you had mentioned Sexton High School. In 1943, when Sexton High School first opened up, they had an all-state basketball team there. And one of the players there was named Hayward Howard. And couldn't play at Michigan State because he was a black man. And he was all-state and the best player on that team. The other thing I wanted to mention is, if I'm not mistaken, Tony Dungy's father had gotten his PhD from MSU.
Yes, he was living in Spartan Village, University Village, when I was playing at Michigan State.
Yeah, Tony talks about his dad taking him to the games.
Well, Bill Ross was my first, as I mentioned, was my first roommate at Michigan State. He was an all-state fullback from Lansing Sexton High School. And Bill decided to go to work at Oldsmobile and quit school. And then I got paired up with Dwight Lee, and then eventually we were sweet mates with Sterling Armstrong and Drake Garrett. But the fusion of the ones of us that came from the South with the players from Detroit and the Saginaw Valley, and they were great players. of great black players in Michigan State's history, and that was one of the things that I heard when I was in high school, because in Fayetteville, when I left to come to Michigan State, they were confused as to whether it was Ann Arbor or East Lansing or whatever, you know. He's in Michigan. And I don't know if it was Michigan, and the only player I can remember, and he was from Newport News, Virginia, when I was a youngster coming up, that played in Michigan, was a defensive back by the name of Benny McRae. And Benny was Michigan's star player. And the social implications, and you try not to mix, you know, politics with sports, but the thing that was interesting about the Notre Dame Michigan State game was the only black player on the Notre Dame football team was a defensive end that's in the Hall of Fame now by the name of Alan Page. And he spent that afternoon trying to make life miserable for me, because Arapasino was always telling that Michigan State didn't want you, they didn't recruit you, you couldn't play there. And we had, at that time, I think, maybe 7 black starters on defense, and the entire backfield was black except for a Hawaiian fullback. And so the social implications of the time during the civil rights movement, it was important that we play well, and with the press that came and that we won the game. When we ended up tying the game, at that time, I remember getting showered and dressed, and our season was over. We were 9-0-1, but you couldn't go to a bowl game because the Big Ten had a no-repeat rule, so you couldn't go to the Rose Bowl, and then they had an exclusive rights contract with the Rose Bowl, so you couldn't go to any other bowl game. So we were done. And Notre Dame had another game to play. They played Southern Cal the next week, and they went out and beat Southern Cal
51-0.
51-0. And that's what started the 1 versus 2 kind of deal. But I think the MacArthur Bowl trophy, which is synonymous with national championships, was split. Michigan State and Notre Dame were co-champions, and we were given rings for being national champs in 19-1-1 over that 2-year period, and I think it was 19 straight Big Ten wins. So it was a pretty good run.
One other thing I was going to mention about the Dungy, most don't realize this, is a few blocks away from here.
Jackson.
There is a subdivision, and it's Dungy subdivision. And it was named after a guy named Andrew Dungy, which is connected to Tony's family back in 1950. And if you were to ask most Lansing historians, most don't know.
Yeah, let me add, I don't know the circumstances. It was 1943 you were talking about. Yeah, Michigan State did have black players in the 20s and the 30s, and I don't know the circumstances of that story, but keep in mind, Biggie Munn, and he brought Duffy with him as an assistant coach from Syracuse. They didn't come here until 1947, and so Biggie Munn and Duffy Daugherty and John Hanna, they were all on the same page that black players, there was no quotas, no nothing, recruit whoever's the best football players.
I'm the 3rd generation to attend Michigan State, and I have grown up hearing my dad was at the 10-10 game, and I have heard stories about that for years. And he's always talked about the brilliance of Duffy Daugherty and how he would go south and bring out those fabulous football players that they weren't playing in the South. And my question is, Jimmy, did you know at the time, did you know the historical significance of what you were doing coming up here to play, or were you just coming up here to go to college and play football?
The question was if the black Jimmy and the other black players from the segregated South knew the historical significance of what they were accomplishing.
To be honest with you, at that time, no. Now, we were aware of, you got to remember, my junior year in high school, at North Carolina A&T was the sit-in that started the integration movement and break down the Jim Crow laws in the South. So we were aware of the civil and social significance of what was happening at the time, but under no way did we realize at the time that we were embarking on something that was going to fuel the future of segregation, integration in the South, and that it would be something that would be monumental in terms of historical significance in athletics and academics, because you have to remember, prior to my coming here, and Stan and Sterling can attest to this, the Little Rock Nine, one of our fraternity brothers was part of the Little Rock Nine. Ernie Green was in Little Rock, Arkansas, was given a scholarship by John Hanna, an academic scholarship by John Hanna, to come to Michigan State. And he found that out later. But there was a lot of things that wasn't openly talked about, that we didn't discuss, but we were privy to the times and the environment and the atmosphere around where we came from and what it was like. But I can't say that I came here with a torch and a martyr and we were going to, that wasn't the case.
But again, Jesse Jackson said that wasn't important. Just being on TV as positive role models was important. And we've had about 3 people say that, talk about being at the game, the Notre Dame 10-10 tie. Attendance was 80,000. I wondered in the last 50 years, Jimmy, how many people have told you they were
Yeah, I think I've met most of that 80,000.
Were your parents able to come see you play in person?
Yes, that's talked about in a chapter in the book. The director of Recreation and Parks in Fayetteville, North Carolina, his name was Arthur Monk Smith, one of my mentors. He and another doctor, Watson Fowler, was a dentist, had a car that could make that trek. And so my mom and dad were able to drive up with them on the weekend and see me play, I think, 2 or 3 times. My mother-in-law, my future mother-in-law, and my mom and dad were able to come on 2 or 3 occasions to see me play, and one, and which was probably the most significant game, or probably the best game I played as a football player at Michigan State, was in 1966 in Ohio State. We won 11-8 in a rainstorm. Was probably my finest hour as a player. Not much is made of it, but that is the day that we won 11-8 and Notre Dame beat Duke. I think it was in North Carolina, 38-0, and we flip-flopped from 1 to 2 after that game. That's when it started leading toward the game of the century.
One more question.
Michael Robinson. 2 things, well, probably 3. I haven't seen Bill, and we were in the same dorm. I would like to know what we can do to start a campaign to get Mr. Raye in the Hall of Fame, Michigan Hall of Fame. Don't answer that yet. Because I was on the field both for Notre Dame and at Ohio State, and I was in the marching band. So it wasn't just athletes and academicians, but also musicians were part of that great tradition that we have here at Michigan State. So I was in that game. I was at the game at Ohio State. I missed the bus, by the way. But my roommate and I were up late the night before, and I had 4 roommates, all white. and I overslept. And we were listening to the radio here on campus, and someone said, if you miss the bus to Michigan, to Ohio State University, give us a call. I called the radio station, and I was driven to Columbus. And as I drove up, the band had already arrived, and they were looking for me. And I had to go meet Dr. Falcone, the band director, and apologize for missing the bus. But I made it. And we played, and we are marching, of course. Every marching band in the Big Ten, Michigan State's Green Machine, out-march. Michigan, Ohio State, and any number of the other Big Ten members. So, Bill, it's good to see you. Mike Robinson.
So you had talent, I had none.
And Hall of Fame.
Yeah. That's a tough question because I don't know what the procedures are, and I've been on Hall of Fame committees that are very frustrating. It's a thankless job, but it's just that there has to be somebody that's on that board that's going to push Jimmy. It comes down to that.
Let's give these gentlemen another round of applause, please. Thank you so much for coming through. There are, of course, books available for sale and for signing. What we'd like to do is give these gentlemen a chance to get out into the hallway and have them actually sign out there. So you can go out and purchase your book and have it signed. So if you could give them a moment, please, to go ahead and make their way out. Then please stop by on your way out. Also, if you have a moment, please stop by and pick up some information about the Historical Society of Greater Lansing. Thank you so much for coming out tonight to support this program.